inception, the purpose of this symposium has been to bring outstanding scholars and practitioners from around the world to talk on leading developments in information technology and their impact on society. We've had, over the past several years, the honor to present people speaking on such things as new concepts of literacy in the modern age and the impact of social media on the culture of youth. Today, we've invited one of the most exciting people in user experience to talk to us. To introduce Aza Raskin, I'd like to quote a line from Douglas Adams that appears on the Humanized website, one of the several businesses that Aza has started. Quote, "We are stuck with technology when what we really want is stuff that just works." That sentence could serve as Aza's guiding principle and has led him into an already very successful career. Aza describes himself as a digital native, and indeed, he literally grew up in the epicenter of the personal computing revolution. His father, Jeff Raskin, started the Macintosh project at Apple Computer in the late 1970s. In 1994, at the age of 10, Aza made his first public speaking appearance with his father on human interface design at the San Francisco Bay Area chapter meeting of SYNCHI, the special interest group for computer and human interaction. By the age of 17, he was traveling and speaking internationally. Aza holds a bachelor's degree with honors in math and physics from the University of Chicago, which is the only degree he ever completed. He left middle school, high school, and graduate school without a degree. In many ways, Aza is a role model. I'm not sure that's one I recommend to all of you. He's done dark matter research at both the University of Chicago and at the University of Tokyo, Tokyo University. His entrepreneurial spirit has led him to start numerous companies. In addition to Humanized, he co-founded Songza, a minimalist search engine for music, which was just recently acquired by Amazon, and Bloxes, which sells furniture made of cardboard. Aza is a prolific writer and has been featured on the cover of Wired magazine. He's the former head of user experience at Mozilla Labs, and now he is the lead designer at Firefox. He's here today to talk to us about one particular type of threat to the web and how to deal with it. I'm delighted to introduce Aza Raskin.
There's another quote from Arthur C. Clarke that almost all of you probably know, which is, technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. There's another reverse quote of that, which is, magic sufficiently dumb is indistinguishable from technology, and that's sort of what I try to get rid of. So I'm here in sort of an unusual capacity, because normally I'm cheering on the web. I'm trying to make the web as awesome a place as it can be, both from a platform perspective, helping to make, say, geolocation part of the web, writing the spec, or getting more people involved in development of the browser. But I'm here today actually to talk about something which scares me, and to ask your help in figuring out ways in which we can solve it. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about Mozilla, because most people don't know about our beginnings. By the way, send me feedback as we go. I'll maybe be able to check it on here and answer your questions if you don't feel like you want to raise your hand. But by all means, please always interrupt me. So the web is a series of unlikely stories. If I told you that the infrastructure of the web is going to be controlled by a group, and there were two groups that were competing to do this. One was a ragtag group of volunteers that got together over the web and made a project, versus Microsoft with billions in their bankroll. And you said, fast forward, who's going to win? Well, it turns out that small ragtag group of people won. But this is not the Firefox story. This is Apache. Right? So this has happened. And then we did it again. In 2003, this is the state of the web. If you look at the very top, you can see there's a very small Internet Explorer. Right? In 2003, IE had won the browser war. They had 98% of the market. And in fact, Microsoft felt so confident in the whole thing that they had taken off, laid off, moved the people from the IE team to other teams. They weren't interested in innovating anymore. And then this small group of people started out as just 4. One of them, I believe, being a 15-year-old, Blake Ross, got together and said, you know what? We can take the ashes of this project from Netscape that went through AOL and now is Mozilla, and we can make it small and lean and fast. We can make a browser that can win back the web. And that was our slogan for a long time, take back the web. In fact, this metaphor of coming from ashes meant that we tried to call the project Phoenix, which we got a lawsuit for. So then we changed to Mozilla, which we got a lawsuit for. But we stuck with that one. Fast forward to 2010, and this is what it looks like. Right? We've won in some sense. Our goal was never to get 100% of the market share, but instead was to create an ecosystem of competition, because it's when you have competition that the web user wins. So now we have Google, Microsoft, Apple, all competing against us. These are not the people you'd choose to compete against, but we are. So what's different? Mozilla is public benefit. We're a not-for-profit. It's actually incredibly cool. Having done a couple startups, you think a startup is the one place that you can take your dream and run with it and just work with it at your idea, mano a mano. But in the end, you still have to make money. At Mozilla, we have enough that there is never a discussion that ends in revenue, which is pretty unusual, both from a business development standpoint, a user experience standpoint, future product standpoint. It never enters our discussion. Before I joined, I thought this was polite marketing speak, but it's actually true, right? And we do this at immense scale. And it still boggles my mind. So we have roughly 100 employees. When I joined, it was sub 100. 2.5 years later, it's now up near around 300. And we think of ourselves as just paid staff, because there are unpaid staff. We're just a scaffolding, because we have on the order of 1,000 contributors, people that write code, people that localize, people that test out or write test cases. And it goes bigger there. We have 10,000 people on the order of who test the products in a real way and will file bugs about it. These are people that get involved in our nightlies. And then we have on the order of 100 million users. Now, it turns out we're up near 450 million. But that's a lot of scale, because when somebody joins Mozilla, whether it's paid staff or unpaid staff, they're responsible for over 1 million people. We only have 4 designers at Mozilla. Each one of us is responsible for over 100 million people, which is a little bit scary, right? You walk in like, here are your 100 million users, have fun. So it's an immense weight, but it also means that people that get involved in the project have an immense ability to change the world. And not in that sort of wishy-washy way. I'm a huge believer in the Margaret Mead quote, that you should never underestimate the power of a small group of concerned citizens to change the world, for indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Right? This is an incredibly poignant example of that. By the way, all of you should get involved, because you can make a huge difference. In fact, we did a design jam earlier today, and I'm pretty sure some of the ideas are going to appear in Firefox 4.5. All right, so I've already talked about the 450 million users and the 1 to 100 million ratio. So this brings up an interesting problem, because you don't have people that necessarily work for you, right? You have a set of peers that you work with. So how is a designer, how is somebody who's trying to make interfaces and lead actually get people to make those things? The open source world, I like to think of as the largest and arguably best engineering department in the entire world. And we're lacking a design department, right? So that's one of the things that I was trying to help out with when I first joined Mozilla, is how do we get people excited about design? How do we make a culture in which code isn't the only thing that's king? And so before I go to the real meat of this talk, I'll leave you with one analogy, that design is really to cause participation and to inspire participation. So if you wanted to build a railroad across the US in an open source way as a designer, how would you do it? You do exactly 2 things. 1, you build the first 100 miles, so people know where you're going and how to start. And 2, you build a resort town at the other end of the US. You tell people where they want to go and why. You make it sparkly and shiny and awesome. And it turns out that the hard part is still yet to come. You still have to go over the Rocky Mountains. You have to go across the plains. You probably have to hunt buffalo and have too much to carry back. And that's okay, right? Because you're there to inspire, to make the mock-ups, the prototypes, the vision, and then to lead people in that vision, right? So that's the role of a designer, I think, not only in open source, but in the world in general. So that's the good part. Now on to the bad part. So your life experience brought to you by Coca-Cola. This is something that occurred to me, as all great ideas do, or terrible ideas, in the shower. And so I'd like to share that shower experience with you now. We're going to start with a simple experiment. I'd like you guys to listen. And you're going to listen to two things. You're going to listen to sound A, and then you're going to listen to sound B. And your goal is at the end, we'll take a vote to see which one you'd rather listen to again. Not which one you like more. All right. So here is sound A. I apologize, it's going to be a little bit loud. Delightful. All right, that was sound A. Sound B. So here's the question. Which of those two would you rather listen to again if I forced you? Sound A? Put up your hands if you like that. OK, sound B? Yeah, that's what I thought. Almost everybody wants to listen to sound B again. Now let me tell you what you listened to. Here is a representation of sound A. It was a chunk of white noise playing for roughly 4 seconds. This was sound B. It was the exact same noise as sound A. It's played for exactly the same amount of time, followed by sound A again, but half as loud. So what does this mean? This means B is roughly 1.5 times worse than sound A from an empirical standpoint. And yet you all just opted for listening to the worst noise. Well, except for like the 3 or 5 of you that probably have seen this experiment before. So this is really weird, right? This is really weird. And this is known, actually, as peak end memory, right? It says when you try to remember an experience, say a vacation, and you want to know how good that experience was overall, you have that gut feeling, there are only 2 things that determine it. What the peak of that experience was, so how high or how low it got, and 2, how it was at the end. So if you're planning your vacation, what you should do is make sure you have one excellent day, and then make sure the very last day is awesome. The rest of it sort of doesn't matter. This is my tip for planning dates, too. So we know that memory is very, very strange. And we know that it lies to us in some ways, and that it can be manipulated. Who knew? Then when you're looking at that first slide, that one with the words listen on it, the human ear below it, those dendrite-y things in the background, who knew that you were just about to have your memory betray you, that your ears would be betrayed by your mind, right? It's sort of strange. So let me tell you a little story. This is Beth Rutherford. Actually, this is not Beth Rutherford. This is a picture of a random girl I found on Flickr. But I'd like to tell you a story about Beth Rutherford. Happened in 1992. She was the daughter of a clergyman. She's a little bit depressed, so she goes to get counseling. She gets counseling from the church counselor. And the church counselor believed, like many psychologists believe, starting from the Freud tradition, that all pathologies in life come from trauma when you're a kid, right? That if you have a traumatic childhood, future, you will be a messed up individual, right? We're all messed up individuals, therefore we all must have had traumatic youths. So, and actually there is some empirical evidence for this. There's a wonderful book, I believe by the name Love at Goon Lake, where it talks about experiments with monkeys, and they very inhumanely or monkeyly, deprive these baby monkeys from having mother contact. And they grew up and they didn't know how to act. They became the equivalent of pathological, right? They wouldn't know what would cause other monkeys pain. So there is some truth to the idea that your childhood experiences have effect later on. But what happened here is that Beth Rutherford went to the counselor, and the counselor tried to help her remember the traumas that had happened in her past that might be causing the depression now. And she did remember. And she remembered some very, very surprising things. She remembered that her father was a clergyman, that her father had raped her repeatedly between the ages of 7 and 14. More disturbingly, she remembered that her mother had held her down to help out her father. She remembered that her father twice impregnated her and forced her to abort with a coat hanger. These are not good memories. But these allegations came up. Her father resigned. There was criminal investigations. This was a triumph of the victim over being victimized, except for one small, niggling little detail, and that was none of it was true. She was tested, and at the age of 22, she was found to still be a virgin. There were none of the telltale signs of an abortion. She ended up suing the church counselor, got over $1 million in settlement, but the damage was sort of done, right? So what could cause somebody to remember something so horrific as the very worst thing you can possibly imagine and believe it to be true and bring these allegations public? So here's the question, right? The big question. Is this normal? Does this happen to everyone, or can this happen to most people? Or instead, is this just one really unfortunate anecdote? So there are certainly other examples of this. In 1986, Nadine Kuhl, who was a church she was a nurse aide. She remembered being in a satanic cult, having been forced to eat babies, and similar things with Vinette Heyman, Elizabeth Carlson. In each case, they're found to be not true, and in some cases, the settlements were as large as $2.4 million, but it ruined these people's lives. So this is 4 cases I've given you of repressed memories being planted in people's heads. But that's still just anecdotal, right? It could still just be freak cases. There are a lot of people out there. So the question then becomes, can we implant memory into people? Can we give you false memory? So Elizabeth Loftus, in this case Jacqueline Pickerel, decided to check this out. And she's done a lot of work in memory, and in particular in eyewitness cases where eyewitnesses come up and they testify. That's sort of considered the smoking gun. And the question is that right? So she investigated, can we implant memories? And she wanted to implant a fairly drastic memory, but she didn't want to make it unethical. So they eventually settled on trying to implant the memory of being lost as a kid in a department store. And it was actually a very specific memory. They wanted to be lost in a department store for an extended period of time, lots of crying. Then they wanted an elderly woman to find you, comfort you, and eventually at the end, reunion with your family and happiness, right? So this was the memory they wanted to implant with all those little details. And they said about doing it. They said, first, let's talk to the parents and the friends, figure out if the person was ever lost. No. Good. 2, we're going to get a couple memories of this person from their childhood, and we're going to put them into a paragraph each. And then we're going to add one more paragraph that has this false memory, just a description of the event. And they then show these paragraphs to these volunteers, who are probably business students, as they always are. And they asked, do you remember these? Are these true memories, false memories? Well, they didn't ask if it's false. They said, do you remember this at all? Did this happen? Can you tell us anything more about it? Just write down your answers, right? So very simple. Then a week later, they invited the people to come back. And they asked them a series of questions, a whole bunch of misdirection questions, then about their memories, and asked, have you ever been lost as a kid? And it turned out something very interesting happened. Did it stick? It did stick. In fact, 1 out of every 4 people remembered now being lost as a child, replete with the long crying, the meeting up with this elderly woman. They remembered where it happened-ish. They remembered finally being brought back to their family. They remembered the whole thing. And they could tell little details about it that were never part of the original paragraph story. Right? So this memory had been implanted in them, which is sort of cool. So what is this? This is Inception, right? Except Inception made it seem like implanting a false memory was hard, right? That you had to go 3 levels deep and like get inside of inner mind's fortress in the middle of a snowstorm. But this is wrong. It turns out that it's really easy to make false memories and perform Inception. It takes 1 session of less than an hour. You're done. A couple paragraphs. So something weird's going on. OK, let's take another memory test. I like these things. I want you guys to start by recalling that picture, the one with the dendrites, the one with the word listen. Has a picture of an ear on it. It's near the beginning, just before you had to listen to those terrible, terrible noises, which I'm sure you'll never forget. Right, so I want you to think about that slide. I want you to close your eyes, sort of imagine it in your head. And then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. All right. Now, you have to vote in this. Nobody can sit out. But who remembers the text being on top? So raise your hand if you remember that. All right, so a good amount of them. Who remembers the ear being on top? Raise your hand. OK. So there are a lot of people in here who remember neither one of these two. Who doesn't remember this slide at all? Ah, OK. So that's good. That's fine. You don't have to listen. It's cool. So of the people that do remember, it turns out only around half of you do remember that slide. How many of you remember there being text at all? OK. And how many of you remember there being an ear at all? Interesting. All right. So we had around 10 people, 15 people in here that remembered the ear. We had around, I'd say, 40 people that remembered the text. Let me show you what was actually on that slide. There was no ear. So using a very crude method, I've just convinced 10 to 15 of you that there was an ear on that slide, that you remembered being an ear. I just asked you. So it really is easy to fiddle with people's brains. All I had to do was mention a couple of times that there was an ear on that slide. And the first time you're probably like, I don't think there was an ear, but whatever. He knows the slide deck pretty well. And by the time you got to the second one, it was OK. That had been planted. So the lesson here is that memory is fallible. But it's predictably fallible. It can be used against us, or you can know your fallibilities and use it to help you become more productive, all of those sorts of things. So this idea of predictably fallible memory is central to the rest of what I'm going to talk about. And that is that your past actions of everything out there are the very best predictor of your future decisions, right? Every marketer knows this. And they know that your past actions are immutable, that happened. So they've always focused on that front part of the equation where they say, we want to know as much about you as possible. This is why demographics, information, and your past purchases are so incredibly valuable. Because if we know your past actions, then we know what you're probably going to do, so we can take our products and slip them into your stream of life so that you buy them, right? That's what almost all marketing is about. So let me give an example. Whenever I think of Dr. Pepper, I always think of Spider-Man. In fact, it's reverse. Whenever I think of Spider-Man, I think of Dr. Pepper. Why? Because in that remake that came out, Peter Parker has just been bitten by the radioactive spider. He's laying in bed, and what happens? He's like, I'm thirsty, and I sort of have this webby thingy, and there's a Dr. Pepper on the other side of the room, and he goes, whoop, and he misses a couple times, but he finally gets it. He gets to have that visceral joy of drinking a cold beverage without having to stand up. It's why we invented robots, really. So these two memories are now associated for me, right? This is the point of product placement, is that their brand is in my head. So when I go to the store, I'm like, oh, Spider-Man, oh, yes. And it's there for me to do, right? How many of you know about the habits of wasps and figs? Yeah, a couple of you. That's awesome. So generally, for every type of fig, there's a different type of wasp. It's not exactly one-to-one. And the wasps lay eggs in figs, right? And some of them just inject their eggs, and some of them will wiggle in and die in there and act as things. Now, all of you, when you eat a fig, are going to think those little crunchy things are wasp eggs. Sorry about that. Probably ruined it. I actually sort of enjoy it, like, ooh, wasps. But this is sort of an analogy in my head for what product placement is, right? It's something crawling inside my head, a little meme crawling inside my head and planting an egg. This is why I didn't become a marketer, right? But we're moving now to a very different sort of environment. We used to be in a broadcasting world, one where everyone watched the same movie, listened to the same type of music, and now we're moving to a world of narrowcasting, where everyone reads different blogs, everyone listens to different music, everyone has their own preferences, and they all can focus in on them, right? So we're moving from a world where everyone reads People magazine, and everyone wants to know about celebrities, to where your friends are replacing celebrities, right? This is, the Facebook world. So this is well known. Everyone talks about the fragmentation of media. But what does this mean? Well, one of the ways that this product placement is moving from... Why are you all laughing? From product placement moving from mass media to personal media was this. This happened in 2009. In June, on Facebook, there were these cool little ads that said, hot singles are waiting for you. And indeed, that may have worked, but there's a little problem, and that is some guy was looking at this ad. He's like, indeed, that hot single is waiting for me. Why? Because she's my wife. Facebook had been using images from your social circle as part of these ads, right? They were giving tacit endorsement of your friends to some company, right? So this is a little bit disturbing. Also hilarious. So what's the trend? The trend is that product placement is getting uncomfortably personal, right? So I'll give you 3 examples that are in my head. There's spy versus spy. So this is the idea of being tracked, behavioral tracking. Yahoo, which doesn't have the biggest ad network out there, already knows 12% of the sites that you visit. So 1 out of every, 10, let's say, because I don't like doing math in my head, sites that you go to, they know where you've been. Sort of creepy. And then they take that information and they target ads to you. This is why if you go to Zappos to buy some shoes, then all of a sudden, every other site around is now giving you shoe after shoe after shoe ad. Or if you go try to look at SUVs or get a Roomba online, then all of a sudden you're getting Roomba ads. And the hilarious thing is that you just bought a Roomba, so why would you need another one, except to make them dual? But that's something else, right? So behavioral tracking is one way in which these sort of product placements, and this is the idea of ad as product placement on the sites that you visit, are getting personal. We go back to Facebook, and they have their whole beacon thing, which are targeting ads directly at you. And this happened to me just 2 weeks ago. Does anybody recognize this? Wow. You. I know way too much about you now. So this is Lone Star, which is some Fox thingy-majig that they're trying to promote. And what happened? What? They already killed it? That's fantastic. So, at least what happened to me is that... What? We already forgot about it? Yeah, our memories. Whoosh. What happened, at least with Fox and me, was that they apparently discovered that I have a number of Twitter followers, and so they're like, that guy, if he talks about it, then everyone else will start watching it. So they sent me a giant party pack. It just showed up in the mail, and I thought it was a bomb, but it turned out to be a set of really tacky glasses, beer and wine, the kind that if you throw at the ground, they bounce. A huge thing of really bad-tasting popcorn, some posters, and they said, hey, you seem like a cool looking dude, you could throw a party. And I should have. But I didn't, right? So they were trying to use me as a local celebrity in some sense, right? In every social group, there's somebody whose judgment you trust on fashion, or somebody's clothes you admire, or a photographer whose camera skills you admire, right? So they want to harness that ability and their trust in friends to get out their products. This is sort of the idea of micro-endorsement. But so far, everything I've said is not really evil. And it's evil that I want to get to. So what's this other trend of the social media stuff? We are now the curators of our own e-autobiography, if you will. The pictures you put on Facebook, the pictures you put on Flickr, the stuff you place on Delicious, the check-ins you make on Foursquare, these form a documentary of your life. Which is sort of cool because you can go back and review what you did before. And the thing is that this documentary, this self-created documentary, is the truth for our friends, right? We don't actually have time to keep up with all of our myriad friends. So you read about them, and what they say is truth. You don't need to fact check. This is just their life. That's fine. But the scary thing, given this memory stuff, is that this self-created documentary is actually truth for you too, right? You go back and you look at the parties you went to, or you get that nostalgic feeling and you want to go look at your graduation, or you guys will in a couple years. So this is the truth for you. And you've created it, and nobody's fact-checked it. So this gets us to digital revisionist history, where if you want to change your past, well, it's pretty easy for you to do so. In fact, if you want to change your present, you can just lie about where you were or what you were doing. You might do it to impress a girl or a guy, who knows? In fact, there's a case that happened fairly recently with Foursquare. So Mike Arrington runs TechCrunch, as you probably all know. And one day, there was a check-in from him at Mozilla headquarters. And our PR people went into a fit, right? They're like, how is he here? Who is he talking to? What's he doing? And they went running around, and I got like 5 phone calls being like, are you talking to him? Are you talking to him? And it turned out that he was just playing around and was checking into places he had never been to. If you looked at his stream, like 15 minutes before that, he was in Singapore. And 15 minutes before that, I don't remember where. He just found a little tool that let him check in random places, right? He was playing with creating false trails. So he was changing his own history, and it had real-world effect. So where do I think digital revisionist history is going to go? Well, it's not really evil for us to do it, per se. They're moral issues, but not interested in those. It's the intersection of our own e-autobiographies with product placement that has me really concerned. What I think is going to start happening is that people are going to start putting product placements into our own pictures, right? So here is a nice little Facebook picture, some guys playing beer pong. And what you could imagine is that Budweiser might say, you know what? I'm going to change all the pictures of beer out there that I can get my hands onto into Budweiser. All right, so now it's a Budweiser can. And Abercrombie could say, you know what? This is an excellent opportunity. That guy's clearly popular to do some branding. So let's have Abercrombie in here. And then Burger King might be like, oh, I want to be in on that. So what's happening here, right? This is just a very simple idea. It says injecting product placement into your own pictures. Doesn't seem all that scary. But you could certainly imagine it happening. You could imagine billboards in the background being changed to Samsung, or pizza on the table being changed to Pizza Hut. You can see all sorts of things. You might even use this for good, right? You might be able to say, hey, if people go back and they're reviewing their own memories, but they're also a little bit phobic about other races, you might inject like a black person or an Asian person or a white person into a photo, right? So they're like, I guess that was a pretty good time, right? But the problem is that these things will change our memories, right? that you're injecting product placement into your own personal past. So why let your life be edited? I actually think it's pretty easy. There's a very clear value proposition, that is all of your friends look at these pictures, right? So if that's true, if a company came to you or to a teenager and said, look, we're going to, for free, remove all skin blemishes, no more zits, make you look a little bit thinner, maybe had a hot girl putting her arm around you, something like that, right? Well, that sounds great. And oh, by the way, all we're going to do is just put a little product placement in. We're just going to change the drink you're drinking. Doesn't really matter. But it has profound implications. So my guess is that this is actually going to start happening in the next couple of years, whether it be with Amazon Mechanical Turk to do it or with other technology. So good news, everybody. Actually, terrible news, and that is that with just one session, one paragraph, that was able to implant false memories into 1 out of every 4 people. If that's true, then changing the photographs of what happened, and you might not even know which photographs were done, right? Because you sign up to the service, and it all happens magically behind the scenes, that your past will actually be changed, that you will remember in a year from now, that you're like, I guess I was drinking Budweiser. Normally, I like beer that tastes like beer, but in this case, I guess I didn't. That your friends, as they look through the thing, as your pictures, as they try to find prospective dates, or they're trying to just sort of relive other people's moments vicariously, they get these subliminal messages from the people that they care about most, about what brands they use. So how do you create a false memory? It turns out there are just 3 conditions that make this very easy. One is you need social demands. You need somebody else telling you that you probably had this memory, or some other form of social proof. So in my case before, I was saying ear, ear, ear. I was asking you to remember an ear, and so your brain actually reconnoiters so that it has this little groupthink property. In this Facebook case, or Twitter case, or Flickr case, there is social proof because that picture creates social demands. Everyone will remember it. 2, you ask people to imagine that event. So in the case of creating the false memory in people of their childhood, they were asked to imagine each event to see whether it happened. That was part of the thing. And 3, you don't ask them consciously to verify. You don't say, are you sure? Because when you ask somebody, are they sure, they will bring it into their locus of attention. And when something's in your conscious, it's much, much, much harder to hold a contradiction. You can hold as many contradictions in your subconscious as you want. That's just fine. And this is not the Freudian subconscious. It's like the cognitive psychology subconscious. So with these 3 things, you can go around creating false memories. And that's why it's a perfect storm. Right? Because changing pictures on Facebook to include product placement will create false memories. We will remember doing things we never did with brands we never did. And remember that our past actions are the very best predictor of our future decisions. So all of a sudden, our future decisions are now in the hands of people that want to make money off of us. And that makes me very, very scared. Because I can see this happening, I can see it happening very soon. So we end up in a place where you're looking in the mirror and you don't look like yourself. This is my attempt at drawing a New Yorker comic. And I'd like to think that it's as exactly unfunny as all the other New Yorker comics. But it is not just personal, right? If it was just about your past, it wouldn't be nearly as bad. But this is about network effects. Because your friends have trust in you, and so when they're reading your live stream and looking at your photos, you are giving that tacit approval, right? This is just as bad as that guy's wife who ended up being his hot single, right? Because all of a sudden you have these 2 Venn diagrams of trust plus brand, and of course, as Zuckerberg actually created Facebook for us for this whole dating thing. He wanted to know who was single, right? So you put these 2 things together, and that's a very, very strong combination. That's what all marketers are seeking. And this, I actually think, gets to be evil. let me move on to something else that I think is sort of evil. Disneyland. There's nobody in the world better at making you wait in line and pay for it. But again, Loftus and some other people were curious. When Disney, I think, reached their 25th anniversary or 50th anniversary, they ran a series of ads saying, like, remember the magic. And this caused waves of nostalgia. People came in. It was actually a very successful campaign. Their question was, did this actually create false memories in people? Is it possible for this to have created false memories, that this nostalgia was a little bit fake? So they went around testing it. They made up these false ads, this one in particular, and it had a little paragraph that sort of described an experience of going into Disneyland, of being a little bit worried about meeting Mickey Mouse or whoever it was, walking up, shaking his hand, getting his picture taken. It asked you to remember that glorious feeling. But they did it with a little swap. In the description, they used characters that that person could not have possibly met. They used meeting Bugs Bunny, who's a Time Warner character, and they used Ariel, who hadn't been invented for the people that, that they were interviewing, right? So it's not possible that they were able to have done this. In fact, they also asked the parents, and some of the people in this thing had never even really been to Disneyland. So what were the results? Turns out after being exposed to this false ad, along with other things, but none about Disneyland, 16% said that they remembered meeting Bugs Bunny. 7% said they remembered meeting Ariel. So this is once again up to around that 1 out of every 4 in total people remembered something that had never happened. Their memories had been hacked to create a warm, false sense of nostalgia that would directly influence their future buying decisions. The funny thing is that the people that remembered Bugs Bunny and Ariel were more confident about it than the people that remembered actually having met these real characters. There are actually some small statistical differences when people remember false things rather than real things. With real memories, they generally have more verbiage and can describe things in a little bit more detail, but it takes a little bit longer for them to talk about it. And with false memories, they remember faster, but with more confidence. So you'll be wrong and you'll be super confident about it. So we will now generate value by having lived. So that's the nice way of saying it. The bad way of saying it is that our personal past is in danger of being rewritten by the marketer. So we have a decision to make. And I take this from the cover of Jonathan Zittrain's book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It. Right? We have 2 courses. We can either sort of head off this path, or we can figure it out in turn. And if we don't manage to turn and figure out how to stop this sort of thing, then we will all, in a very real way, end up a little bit like Ruth, with our past no longer being pristine, with our past being monetized by other people. And this one oasis will be gone. And what I need help from you guys is to figure out how we can stop this, because I do not know if there's a way yet to inoculate ourselves. Knowing that your memory works in strange ways doesn't keep you from making those mistakes, right? I read about that sound experiment, but the first time it was tried on me, I did exactly the same thing that all of you did, because I wasn't thinking about it consciously. So how do we stop it so that our past remains sacred? That's all.